All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening to learn about the Arizona Legislature and democracy, or democracy in the Arizona Legislature, and what's going on there and how you can be involved in helping to stop some of the anti-democracy measures and also maybe help promote a few good ones. So we're very pleased this evening to have with us Amanda Lugo. She uses she, her, aya pronouns. And Amanda is the Arizona Senior Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local and All Voting is Local Action. And All Voting is locals' priorities are to remove barriers to the ballot, increase voting for eligible voters, ensure fair rules for registering to vote and casting a ballot, and support efforts to restore federal protections for the right to vote. And they have been amazing partners and leaders on trying to make sure that there is a strong voice against what is happening at the legislature on the anti-democracy front and promoting everyone's right to vote. So with that, Amanda, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Like Sandy said, my name is Amanda Lugo. My pronouns are she, her, aya. I'm the Arizona Senior Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local, which is our C3, and All Voting is Local Action. This is the agenda for this evening, so I'll talk a little bit about the work that we do nationally and also in Arizona. We'll talk about what's happening at the Arizona State Legislature, and then we'll dive into ways to take action. We'll do a brief testimony training, which is really exciting to offer because on January 25th, y'all have your lobby day. So we'll learn some tactics to use if you are speaking either for or against certain bills. And then we'll also talk about our democracy pledge. So All Voting is Local and All Voting is Local Action is a national organization that fights to remove discriminatory barriers to voting before the next election, empowering communities of color, young people, low-income Americans, and voters with disabilities so that all of our voices are heard. We are in 8 states: Arizona, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, and Georgia. I've been working as the Arizona Senior Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local since August of 2021. So this is some of the work that we do here in Arizona. During the Arizona State Legislature, we track bills. We are on the Voting Rights Coalition. I organize press conferences, one of which will be happening on February 1st, where Sandy will be one of our speakers. We also work on the Arizona Elections Procedures Manual. I host an Introduction to Community Organizing and Voting Rights Fellowship. That is a paid fellowship opportunity between 6 to 8 weeks. We do county advocacy work. We are on the Native Vote Coalition. We host the Defending Democracy Coalition. We have an election advocacy group. We work on election protection. I run an election worker recruitment program with the counties that are in Arizona. Again, we're on the Voting Rights Coalition, and we also work on jail-based voting. So each legislative session, there are attempts to pass legislation that will undermine democracy. Examples of these are restricting voting access, undermining the electoral process and election infrastructure, purging voter rolls. We saw this a couple of legislative sessions with the Pebble purge. We now have the active early voting list instead of the permanent early voting list. And then there's creating new barriers to voter registration. These are some more specific attacks. So we see attacks on vote by mail and early voting. Again, the voting purges, efforts to farm out purges through third parties and election officials. We saw this with the cyber ninjas in the sham election review a couple of years ago. There's also attacks on ballot measures, criminalizing election officials and just trying to make their lives harder than they need to be. And then there's always new and inventive ways to sabotage elections and ballot counting attacks as well. So these are specific attacks that we see for the 2020-24 session thus far. Some of the efforts are to undermine the use of tabulators. Tabulators are the machines that count ballots. And a lot of the attacks on ballot tabulators are just based on pseudoscience. Some of the talking points that you can use to combat efforts to undermine the use of tabulators are examples include removing tabulation machines weakens democracy and people's trust in our democracy. And anti-democracy actors don't want machine tabulators to show that democracy works. So another attack that we see is efforts to limit early voting. The anti-democracy forces are in a split mind here. So some of them think that they've done everything in their power to attempt early voting, mail-in voting, and the use of ballot drop boxes. Last legislative session, if you attended any of the committee hearings, either the House municipal or the Senate hearings that had to do with elections and democracy in general, there were often people that were wearing like the one day, one vote shirts. And that is in an effort to have voting just be on one day and in person. And that would really impact the way a lot of voters vote in Arizona. So some talking points that we could use to combat these efforts to limit early voting are that, Arizonans have voted by mail since 1991. Vote by mail also was something that became popular with Republican legislators. Early vote ballots are safe and secure. 80% of Arizonan voters choose to vote by casting a ballot mailed to their home. If you have a ballot mailed to your house, you have a little more time to make informed decisions about what's on your ballot and who to vote for as well. We respect voter choice, right? That voters should have a variety of choices. Voting should be easy and accessible for all voters as well. The third threat that we see is the push for 100% hand counting of ballots. So every county does a limited hand count audit after every election to validate the tabulator results. If the initial results don't match, they take in a larger sample. And then after several steps, the law requires 100% hand count. So that's never happened because the tabulators are fairly accurate. So some of the talking points that you can use to combat the 100% counting of ballots is that hand counting ballots is unquestionably less accurate and more time consuming than ballot tabulation. Arizona voters deserve to know that their votes are being counted accurately and efficiently. And these are direct quotes from Governor Hobbs's veto letter on HB 2722, which was a bill that was trying to get more hand counting of ballots. So we need you to take action. We need people like you to be educated and mobilize your communities. Voting is the last act in the civic engagement process, and that begins today, right now, as we fight to ensure that the 2024 election is even more successful than 2022. And ways that we can do that is talking about ways to give testimony. So testimony provides the public with an opportunity to speak directly to public officials. It ensures that public officials receive information that's important to your community. You're the best advocate for your community because you know it the best. So components of effective testimony are that you establish your credentials. You identify a critical point. You tell a story that people can relate to. You provide evidence. You list the consequences, and you specify your ask. So you want to establish your credentials. You want to list like the basics, demographic information about you. What's your name? Where do you live? Who are you as a member of your community? And if applicable, what is your contact information? So this could be an email, this could be a cell phone number, whatever you're comfortable with disclosing in terms of contact information, because this will go into public record as well. You want to identify the critical point, and these are some questions to help you prepare that critical point. Why are you providing testimony? So why are you here? What's the purpose of your testimony? What's the issue or concern? And what is the one thing you want remembered from your testimony? Thirdly, we want to tell a story. We want to make it personal. We want to make it relatable. You want to weave in some facts, illustrate a point, keep it brief, and make it memorable. Then you want to provide some evidence. So what's the data and facts you have to support your position or point? Is it research-based? And then what data points that are relevant to your own testimony? You want to list the benefits or the consequences. So if nothing changes, what will happen to you and your community? And how can Arizona benefit from the proposed change? Lastly, you want to specify your ask. What do you want your audience to do? So now that you provided testimony, what do you want these public officials to do? Do you want them to vote for or against the issue at hand? What do you want them to consider? What do you want them to change? And then you want to end with a concluding statement. This is really silly, but as we know, probably from things like PEMDAS, that silly is what kind of gives us memory and helps really draft your testimony, but also like remember the clear components of it. So if you have your hand up, you want to have your thumb, which is how you introduce yourself and establish your credentials. Your first finger is going to be your critical point. So what's the issue you're addressing? My name is Amanda Lugo. My pronouns are she, her, ea. I'm the Arizona Senior Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local. I'm here today to talk to you about giving testimony. Your second finger is your story, right? What makes this issue important to you and why should you care? And why should other kids care? The ring finger is going to be your evidence and facts, the facts that you want your public officials to care about. Also list the consequences of not doing what you ask. And then the pinky is going to be the ask. Tell them what you want them to do specifically and succinctly. So those are the 5 components of your handy guide to drafting testimony. Again, here are some best practices. So you want to draft your comments ahead of time and practice aloud to ensure that your remarks fit within the allotted time that you have to give testimony. With Board of Supervisors meetings, we usually see them as being 3 minutes. It could be also decided the day of the committee hearing how long you'll have to give your testimony. You want to practice in front of an audience and record yourself on Zoom. It's helpful to see how you speak on Zoom as well when you're recording yourself. Are you saying are you saying like? These are just habits that will help you make the best use of your time when you're providing testimony. You want to introduce yourself and share where you live. So city, town, county. If you're presenting at the Arizona State Legislature, you probably want to say what district you live in. Share what issue you want to discuss and whether you support or oppose the issue. List the consequences or benefits. What will happen if nothing changes? How can the community benefit from the proposed change? And then you want to provide feasible solutions or alternatives if you foresee challenges. And then you always want to thank people for their time and for listening. So we're going to move into the Democracy Pledge. The site for the Democracy Pledge is democracypledgearizona.com. So the Democracy Pledge states that no matter our color, background, or code, all Arizonans value our freedom to vote, deserve practices that protect our access to the ballot, and leaders that will support our democracy. You can sign the Democracy Pledge to support policies that ensure all Arizonans can cast a ballot that counts. And by signing the Democracy Pledge, you're stating that you support the right to register to vote at any time prior to the deadline without facing barriers, access to the ballot in person and by mail, no matter where you live, what language you speak, or what physical abilities you have the freedom to vote without intimidation, respect the privacy of individual election information and easy access to public information, respect for tribal sovereignty and consultation with tribes about elections, and then have a nonpartisan counting of ballots and respect for the results. So that's all I have for you this evening. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Again, my name is Amanda Lugo. My pronouns are she, her, ea, and I am the Arizona Senior Grassroots Manager with All Voting is Local.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was great. And just to let folks know, Amanda touched upon the themes of what the legislature is doing or how they're trying to undermine voting. We will have a fact sheet for you that will have specific bill numbers and on those bills that we'll be focusing on that day, and we'll also be discussing that in our program, the Bills program too. So with that, I'll open it up for questions. You can put your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute. Let's see. I don't know if anyone is typing. While we're waiting for people, I have a question. So, oh, wait, there's a hand up. Sorry, I missed it. There it is. Lila. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a lot of bills that are in the circulation or whatever to limit access to voting right now?
Yes, there's always an overabundance of bills that are going to limit voting access. It's really skewed in terms of bills that would limit and suppress voting accessibility to vote, bills that will improve voter access. We at the Voting Rights Coalition have a bill tracker that we use. There's other organizations that do that as well. One of the things that I do want to stress is that just because a bill may die in one legislative session does not mean that we cannot stop being vigilant in this fight as well. As Sandy can attest to, oftentimes these ideas come back, bills come back as zombie bills. So it's really our responsibility, even though we have a Democratic governor and a Democratic attorney general and a Democratic secretary of state, to continue to defend democracy, to avoid election sabotage and election subversion.
Right, I think Heather was next.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I have a little bit of a strange question maybe, but I'm organizing some people in addition to Environmental Day at the Capitol to go to the Capitol and meet with legislators, and I'm pretty new at it. I'm just helping a little bit. But one of my colleagues would like to come, but I was thinking about this with what you said about testimony and presenting yourself and where you live. She is a green card holder, and she is wondering about what do I need to say or disclose? I cannot vote legally in the US, but so she's like, but I still want to be involved, but I don't know if I need to tell them when I meet them like I'm not a voter, or should I still say like I'm your constituent and I live in this area or this district? And I was wondering if you have any suggestions about that for being forthcoming, but not limiting yourself as you're trying to get the ear of legislators. Thank you.
That's a really great question. Thank you so much for asking that. So my fellowship program is actually a majority of people that are ineligible voters. So it's really important to hear stories from people that don't have the actual right to vote to talk about voting. I would suggest that you would tell this person to disclose what they feel comfortable with. But they are, I think, one of probably the strongest advocates in this fight in terms of motivating other people to vote on their behalf. And I think that that is a really powerful voice to have. I guess in terms of giving suggestions, in terms of talking about their citizenship status, I don't think they need to disclose that. They can say that, like, I am a constituent in this district. And then just feeling as comfortable as they are with their own personal narrative or story of self. But I think in terms of organizing other folks, you have a really strong person in your arsenal to be able to help motivate other people and organize other people in your community too.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Dre.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Amanda and Sandy, for hosting all of this. Question I have is whether people, whether you have a list of the people who have already signed the Democracy Pledge, so we're not asking the same people that maybe already have signed.
I have that on the back end. I don't disclose that just because that's
Okay.
information. But if people signed it more than once, it won't duplicate the numbers on my back end, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess what I was thinking more was our legislators. I don't want to waste my time with our legislators if they're already friendlies, and we can already count them in the camp of, you know, what we're trying to achieve here.
I would always suggest organizing 101 is really to continue to, I don't want to say pester, but continue to stress the message to people. I think as many touches as you have with the same information is always really important to have. So we did have a different site that was for legislators in particular, but the Democracy Pledge is mostly for constituents. So if a legislator wanted to sign it as just an Arizonan, they are more than welcome to do that.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great. Kurt or Barb? I think it's Barb that is has.
It is. You know, I just wanted to ask about the amount of bills that come through that, and this is from being on the request to speak system, that we're voting no on versus the yeses. It just seems like there's so many more, which I know why. It's because they're in the majority and they seem to get all their bills introduced and passed, and the other ones they kill them or something. I don't know, but it's just like, do they really listen to the request to speak system? Is it, I know this is kind of off the track, but.
So I think sometimes people are discouraged just because of the makeup of the Arizona State Legislature, but the request to speak system and giving public testimony and giving testimony at the committee hearings is really important for veto letters, because that public record is what Governor Hobbs can use in veto letters in saying why she vetoed a certain bill. So it is just a different tactic that we're using now, given, again, the three Democratic elected officials that we have in the state. We still do have a Republican-led legislature, and having you all give testimony that is pro-democratic, pro-voter is just so much more important in killing these bills now, in ways that it was different in the way that we worked in previous administrations.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Horst, and then we'll go to the chat questions.
Yes, thank you. I'm new to Arizona, and I was just wondering, are there any hindrances to registering to vote left over from the previous administration in Arizona?
What do you mean by hindrances?
Well, I'm thinking in terms of proof of citizenship kind of thing.
That bill from last legislative session is going to the Supreme Court, am I correct on that, Sandy? HB 2492.
Yes, I think that's right. I have to go back and look, but there are things that are left over from the Ducey administration, like the elimination of the permanent early voting list, which
the Pebble purge. So we used to have a permanent early voting list, and it now has become an active early voting list. And I have information that Sandy can send out to participants after this, but the active early voting list is no longer permanent. When you get your mail-in ballot, you need to use it in 2 elections. Otherwise, you become purged from the system. So if you decide to vote in person when you're on the active early voting list in 2 election cycles, you can be removed. So instead of it being permanent again, it just becomes a mail-in voting list.
yeah, and there were a bunch of measures they got through that make it more difficult to do initiatives and referenda as well, ballot measures. So, okay, let's see. Is there an alternative to tabulator machines besides a hand count?
No, unfortunately.
Okay. And what is the reasoning that legislators use to support these initiatives to restrict voting rights? Fraud? Is that one?
I think oftentimes the reasoning is based on just being honest, white supremacist tactics in terms of these attacks being xenophobic, these attacks being racist and ableist as well. If we get rid of things like early voting and mail-in voting, it will impact voters with disabilities in Arizona. If we make ballots only available in the English language, we're limiting the types of access for folks who are American citizens, but maybe are more comfortable speaking and reading in Navajo or Spanish. We also have just limitations in terms of class as well when we're thinking about limitations to voting. So I don't necessarily know how they reason with that in their mind in terms of thinking about limiting voting. But those are some of the ways that it affects voters of color, voters in rural and suburban communities, voters that are on reservations as well.
Okay. Oh, yes, Lila, you have another question?
Yeah, just going off of that, my mom kind of speculates that like limiting voting access to these groups because they're more likely to vote Democrat. I don't know if that's like true. Maybe clarify.
I think some of these attacks that we saw did come after 2020, where we saw increases in voters of color and young voters using vote by mail and early voting just across the nation in terms of being able to vote safely during the pandemic. Again, vote by mail in Arizona was a Republican-led initiative. And then once certain people did vote, using that, it then became an issue. So Arizonans deserve the right to be able to choose who represents them. Representatives don't have the right to say who votes for them.
And there are certain types of measures that they're trying to implement that do disproportionately affect certain populations, like tribal nations, for example, and some of these measures to limit being able to use things like drop boxes. And so, yeah, they're, discriminatory measures. Any other questions? I think we got all the ones in the chat. One more. Oh, it's a comment about, that the tribes were important for Biden here. So, okay. Well, I think that those are all the questions. And we really appreciate you being with us this evening, but especially appreciate all the work that you're doing every day to make sure that people can vote. I don't think we can emphasize enough how important it is. If we don't speak up for democracy, we will surely lose some of these important rights, or they'll be much more difficult. So I know it is the work that you're doing is just critical. So thank you so much. And Lila has another question. So there we go. Oh, sorry.
Just one more. I just was wondering if there's any bills to increase voting rights right now.
There's usually a few. I do not have the bill numbers off the top of my head right now. Sandy will have that sheet available for you all with the bills that are going to be heard on your lobby day on the 25th that are for and against voting. But not everything is doom and gloom. There are people at the Arizona State Legislature that are trying to protect our right to vote, and not only protect it, but expand it. So I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, but we do need folks like you to continue to remain vigilant and educate your own communities about voting. And I'm so grateful to be able to spend this evening with you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. There's automatic voter registration for sure. I saw those, and those will be on the list that you all get. I was just starting to work on that democracy handout, so you should be getting that soon. And yes, thank you again, Amanda, and thank you all for your good questions. And Jana, you had one last thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to point people out to I think it's the next Zoom meeting about rainwater harvesting, and I wrote it in the information in the chat, though it's kind of broken up, but it's Friday during lunch from 12 to 1 with Dan Stormont, who's a certified rainwater harvesting practitioner with Watershed Management Group. And lower down is a link to that blog that has the rest of the information.
Great. Yes. Thanks so much for giving that plug. And then, of course, hopefully we'll see you all on the 25th. We also will have the bills. So we'll be talking about specific bill numbers on the 22nd. So, all right. Thanks. And oh, and don't forget, if you can, come out for the news conference on February 1st as well. And what time is that again, Amanda?
It is from 12 to 1 on February 1st. And then on February 29th, we will have a mid-session post-crossover week press conference in the Rose Garden from 12 to 1 as well. And I just put my documents that helped me with this presentation and voting information in the chat. So you all have access to that information as well.
Great. I think you already gave me access to that, but I'll be sure and make sure those get shared. So, all right. Well, thanks so much, and have a great rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.